In this movie, we'll take a look at how you measure the success of your color adjustments using the histogram panel. So for starters, I'm going to go up to the window menu and choose histogram in order to bring up the panel over here on the right-hand side of the screen. Now, the thing is, I need to be able to see this histogram panel as I'm working inside the properties panel, but the second I bring up the properties panel by double-clicking on a thumbnail for an adjustment layer, that's going to automatically hide the histogram panel from view. So here's what I suggest we do. Notice inside this little group here, we have both the histogram panel and the info panel. And to keep them on screen, I'm going to go ahead and grab that little scrubby thing at the top of the panel group, and I'm going to drag it and drop it in between the color panel at the top of the screen and the layers panel below it. And that way, the histogram panel will remain visible. Next, notice that we have this little warning icon above and to the right of the histogram, and that's telling us that the histogram isn't quite accurate. And what we need to do is update it by clicking on this little warning icon, or you can click on this refresh icon. Either one will do. And that, in most cases, is going to change the histogram ever so slightly. But what I want you to notice here is that we have less action in our highlights than we might like. So notice that we have a ton of midtones, which is really great. We got some nice shadow action going on, but things are drifting away up here in the highlights, which means that this image could probably stand a little additional contrast. So I'm going to double click on the thumbnail for the darken adjustment layer to bring up the brightness contrast options here inside the properties panel. And then I'm going to crank that contrast value as high as it goes, which is 100, and that's going to spread the histogram out. So notice, if I reduce the contrast, that's going to squish the histogram together because we're taking all those highlights and shadows and turning them into midtones. We also have this flatness on the top of the histogram, which is not a good thing because it indicates a lack of variety. And so to spread things out, just go ahead and crank that contrast value, in this case, all the way to its highest setting. Also notice if I increase the brightness value, I'm going to shove the histogram over to the right, but because brightness contrast does not result in clipping, I am not seeing any white spike over here on the right-hand side. By the same token, I can go ahead and reduce the brightness value, in which case I'm going to shove the histogram over to the left. Again, I'm not getting a big spike over here on the left-hand side because I'm not clipping any shadows to black, but I am losing a ton of midtone and highlight information, which is not what I want. So I'm going to try to balance things out a little bit here by taking this value up to -50, which does a nice job of spreading the histogram. And to make sure that is the case, go ahead and click on that little caution icon to update the histogram. And we still have some pretty darn tapering highlights, but if we go any farther, to my eye, the image isn't going to look right on screen. So in other words, we need to use a combination of the histogram along with some aesthetic good taste. All right, now I'm going to switch over to the other image, and its histogram looks about as good as it's going to. A couple of things I want you to notice here, though. If I switch the channel from luminosity to RGB, we are going to see a different kind of graph. I'll go ahead and update it here. Notice that we are cheating very close to the left-hand edge with this histogram, and we might be ramming into the right edge as well. And if I switch to the other image here, I believe we have some actual clipping. Notice that spike right there at black. And if I click on the update icon, it gets even taller. And that tells us that we do have some clipping occurring inside the shadows. But if I go ahead and switch this channel option from RGB to colors, we can get a sense of what that is. Can you see that blue right there? That tells me that I'm clipping only in the blue channel. I'm not clipping in the red channel, which looks very healthy, or the green channel. It looks good as well. It's just the red channel, and that's because I have so much ocean in the background. This was a scuba dive after all, so there's really nothing to be done about that. Color clipping in a single color channel is not really a problem. That's why I had you change channels to luminosity so that we're seeing the real luminance information and nothing more. All right, I'm going to go ahead and switch back to this image right here. And I'm going to click the background item down here at the bottom of the layers panel. I might as well hide the properties panel as well. Now you might figure that would go ahead and isolate that original image here inside the histogram panel. But notice this source option is set to entire image. If I want to look, in other words, at the before histogram, I have to change that to selected layer. And that will show me what the histogram for that original image looks like, which is to say we had very little in the way of shadows. We had a lot of dark midtones going on, and then we had next to nothing in the way of light midtones and highlights. And so this is technically a really great histogram because we don't have any clipping. However, it does show us that we have an image that's in need of correction. Whereas if I go ahead and change that source back to entire image, we can see that we've done a great job of spreading that histogram out in order to produce an image that has a lot more luminance variety with lots of healthy shadows, some great midtones, and a fair number of highlights as well. And that's how you use the histogram panel to gauge the quality of your luminance adjustments here inside Photoshop.